This video intends to give a brief introduction to literary criticism, particularly on the differences between the terms literary criticism, literary discussion, and literary interpretation. Also, it intends to give a brief overview of modern literary theories and modern criticism. What is literary criticism? Matthew Arnold, a 19th century literary critic, describes literary criticism as a disinterested endeavor to learn and propagate the best that is known and thought in this world. Implicit in this definition is that literary criticism is a disciplined activity that attempts to describe, study, analyze, justify, interpret, and evaluate a work of art. By necessity, Arnold would argue that this discipline attempts to formulate aesthetic and methodological principles in which the critic can evaluate a text. Anyone who evaluates a text in this fashion is a literary critic. When we consider its function and its relationship to texts, literary criticism is not usually considered a discipline in and of itself, for it must be related to something else, that is, a work of art. Without the work of art, the activity of criticism cannot exist, and it is through this discerning activity of criticism that we can knowingly and deliberately explore the questions that help define our humanity, critique our culture, evaluate our actions and feelings, or simply increase our appreciation and enjoyment of both literary work and fellow human beings. What is a literary discussion? Developed in the 1980s, literary discussion groups, or LDGs, were inspired by a group of students who wanted to continue talking about their books as a group. As a result, educators across the nation have utilized this type of small group work in their literacy classrooms. Its main purpose is to develop critical thinking, speaking, and listening skills while diving deep into the text as a peer group. LDG support collaboration, independence, and reading as a social and lifelong experience. What is a literary interpretation? An interpretation is an explanation of what the student believes a work means. Interpretation often occurs when writing literature papers about poetry or complex works such as epic poems. The student interprets the meaning of the literary work but simply stops there. Instead of trying to analyze the deeper meanings of the literary work, the student interprets what he or she believes the author is trying to portray. This implies that literary analysis or criticism is a much deeper approach in dealing with literary pieces as compared with a literary discussion and a literary interpretation. Brief overview of modern literary theories and modern criticisms. Matthew Arnold's death in 1888 and to a lesser degree Henry James's death in 1916 marks a transitional period in literary criticism. Like Dryden, Pope, and Wordsworth before him, Arnold was the recognized authority and a leading literary critic of his day, and it is his theories and criticisms that embody the major ideas of his era. With the passing of Arnold, the predominance of any one person or set of ideas representing a broad time period or literary movement ends. After Arnold, literary theory and criticism become splintered and more diversified, with no one theory tenaciously held by all. At the end of the 19th century, most critics emphasize either biographical or historical approaches to texts. Using Hippolyte Adolphe Taine's historical interest in a text and Henry James's newly articulated theory of the novel, many critics investigated a text as if it were the embodiment of its author or a historical artifact, In the year that follow Arnold and James, no single universally recognized voice dominates literary theory. Instead, many distinctive literary voices give rise to a host of differing and exciting ways to examine a text. What follows in the 20th and 21st century is a variety of schools of criticism, with each school asking legitimate and relevant but different questions about a text. Most of these schools abandon the holistic approach to literary study, which investigates, analyzes, and interprets all elements of the artistic situation in favor of concentrating on one or more specific aspects. The following are some of the most prominent schools of 20th and 21st century interpretation. And that ends this video on the introduction to literary criticism. Please do not forget to like and subscribe on this channel.